stab wounds on both victims were on the right side of the neck.
It just didn't have the feel of random. You know what I'm saying?
Immediately, they all knew, yes, we are dealing with a serial killer here.
He feels like they have sabotaged his career as a doctor. The investigators firmly believe that he was on his way to kill more people that he held a grudge against.
This was the biggest trial in the state of Nebraska in more than half a century. I'm Henry Cordes. I'm a reporter and staff writer for the Omaha World Herald newspaper in Nebraska. It was the talk of the neighborhood when the first news reports broke that a young boy and an older woman in a house literally right up the street from me, had been murdered. This is just not the kind of stuff that typically happens in my neighborhood. I mean, most people have heard of Warren Buffett, where these murders occurred was about 6 blocks from his house. It's a very nice neighborhood, and it just came as a shock to everyone. These murders had occurred in the home of a very prominent doctor named Bill Hunter, who had arrived home from work one day to shockingly find that his 11-year-old son, Tommy, and then Shirley Sherman, a person who came weekly to the Hunter house to clean, had both been murdered.
I am Jeff Sherman, and I am Shirley Sherman's son. She was 57 years old at the time of her murder. I had spoke to her the day before. We were supposed to meet up. She was supposed to help me with some paperwork stuff. Never got the call, which I thought was odd. And then got a call from my father about 11 p.m. that night that my mom had been murdered.
They had both been stabbed to death. In fact, they had been killed with knives that had been taken right from the kitchen. The killer had actually left the knives impaled in their necks.
You go through life thinking things like this, you see it on TV, you're thinking things like this never happened to you, and then when it does happen to you, you're just floored. The first thought was, why her? What did she do to deserve this? So you got all kinds of just crazy thoughts rolling through your mind. It was very, very, very tough the first 24 hours. We were just left with a lot of questions and no answers.
I'm Dr. Brianna Fox. I'm a professor in the Department of Criminology at the University of South Florida. Despite the fact that these were such brutal murders and a child was killed in such a vicious way, there was really nothing that led investigators to a potential suspect.
Part of the problem in this case from the very beginning was that police didn't even know who the intended victim was. Was it Tommy, the young boy? Was it Shirley? Was it Dr. Hunter or his wife, who was also a physician? Were they perhaps the intended victims?
There was nothing stolen out of that house. My mom had like a bunch of cash in her purse that was never touched. From what I was told, that the hunter's home was a very nice home, so I'm sure they had a lot of valuables. None of those things were taken, nothing. So you can kind of rule robbery out. So rule it pretty quick if nothing's missing.
The loss of their youngest son was just devastating for the whole Hunter family. And Tom was just a bright kid that everybody loved. You know, even though he was only 11 years old at the time, everyone could see Tommy one day growing up to become a doctor like his mother or father, or a scientist, or really whatever he wanted to do.
My mom didn't have any enemies. My mom was loved by everybody. She bartended and she cleaned houses for a living. My mom wasn't rich by any means, you know, but she was living as comfortable as she wanted to live, because at that time in her life, her focus was her grandchildren. They were looking at, you know, some of my mom's relationships. My mom did date a lot of people. You know, she was married one time. They started looking into maybe some past boyfriends, things like that. And we all had to be interviewed. They all swabbed our DNA and did some other stuff. We even had to take lie detector tests, which I thought was kind of weird. But that maybe it's part of their process on eliminating suspects.
Frankly, that didn't go anywhere. And so they looked into circumstances related to Tommy. You know, could have this been some type of, you know, pedophile who was targeting Tommy? Was it someone who knew him from school? In the case of Dr. Hunter, both he and his wife, who was also a physician, they had, you know, certainly dozens, if not hundreds, of patients over the years, including some who maybe weren't really happy with something that had happened.
It just didn't have the feel of random. You know what I'm saying? Like there was something, they were missing something.
As the investigation proceeds, there are a couple of potential leads. I'm Dr. Joni Johnston, a clinical and forensic psychologist and private investigator. A couple of the neighbors report seeing an olive-skinned man around that time. One person talks about the fact that they had locked eyes with this man and he had kind of sped up and left. And as it turns out later, parked on a different street. Other people have cited this kind of silver Honda CR-V that was unfamiliar with the neighborhood.
This olive-skinned man just remained a mystery man. They could not figure out who he was and what he was doing there. A year passed, there was still no arrest. The Hunter family marked the 1-year anniversary of it with kind of a candlelight vigil outside their home, and it just only served to underscore the fact that they did not know who did this, and the police frankly had no idea who had done it.
We put our reward, we upped the reward, and then we got it on America's Most Wanted, but you know, nothing really came out of that at all. My uncles all got together with my grandfather and they hired a private investigator. The private investigators turned everything over to the feds, and the feds, all they did was pass it on to the Omaha Police Department. And that was it.
The police were just very frustrated. You know, the case had hit a dead end. At one point, they even brought in an FBI profiler. The FBI profile came up with a lot of theories. A lot of them really, in the end, didn't come out to be true, but the profiler was very right in one thing he said. He said, you might not catch this guy until he kills again.
From about 2008 to 2013, it was a cold case. There wasn't a lot to really go on for the Omaha Police Department.
Omaha police were called to a home in the western part of the city where they found an older man and an older woman dead in their home. The man had been shot and the woman had been stabbed, and the older man had also been stabbed as well. On the floor were pieces of a handgun. In fact, the clip that held the ammunition had kind of dropped down right in the doorway, kind of fallen apart. One of the detectives who showed up at the scene was a police officer named Derek Moyse, who had been very much involved in the Hunter killings. You know, it looked familiar to him. He saw two bodies down on the floor. He saw that both appeared to have been stabbed to death, and surely had occurred, and the stabbings had occurred with knives that had been taken from the home. These victims were Dr. Roger Brumback and his wife. And Roger was a colleague of Bill Hunter in the Creighton University Department of Pathology.
I get a call from my uncles, and I'm out in Colorado at the time, I'm working, and he said, hey, there's been a second set of murders. Another person from Creighton University had been murdered.
Immediately, they all knew, yes, we are dealing with a serial killer here. And he's someone who's targeting Creighton University doctors. I learned about a Creighton doctor, Dr. Butra, who worked with both Dr. Hunter and Dr. Brumback. And I called her up one day, and she confirmed that the same day that Roger Brumback had been killed, someone had tried to break into her home, had been unable to gain entry, and had left. And when you synced the timing of these events, that break-in had occurred about an hour before whoever had broken in and killed the Brumbacks.
This is no coincidence. We have a family in 2008 in which the father in the house worked at Creighton University in the pathology department. We now have a murder in 2013 where the former head of the pathology department at Creighton University has been murdered. And we now have evidence that another member at Creighton University at their pathology department was targeted, although unsuccessfully.
There was a reason they chose to stab them in the right side of the neck. That is where the carotid artery is. Whoever did this certainly knew what they were doing. The police chief formed a task force. It was very clear that Creighton University and its pathology department was something that they needed to take a hard look at. So this time, they requested all of the records from the Creighton University pathology department, personnel records going back to 2000.
What they're looking for are, residents who've been dismissed, residents who were disgruntled or who made complaints, potentially other physicians that had problems, and they identify a few suspects among this group. Some residents who had ended up leaving the program under, kind of a cloud, and they began looking at this list.
He had actually been in Creighton in the 2000 and 2001 school year, so it had, by now, it was been a dozen years had passed since he had even worked there. So that maybe didn't make him seem like the most likely suspect. As he started paging through it, he saw that Dr. Garcia had some pretty significant conflicts with people at Creighton, including with Dr. Brumbach.
Anthony's mom was born in Mexico. His father was actually born in the U.S. and fought in the Vietnam War. His mom was a nurse. His father worked as a postal worker. And both of them, and particularly his mom, seemed to have very, very high expectations for Anthony. She really dreamed that her oldest of three would become a doctor. When Anthony was in the second grade, he was diagnosed with a really severe reading disability. And that made school very challenging for him. However, he was really, really good at math. And he really excelled at that, and he learned to love it. And he always said that he wanted to be a mathematician, but his parents were so set on him becoming a doctor that seemed to take over his ambitions.
After graduating from the University of California at Davis, Garcia then enrolled in medical school at the University of Utah. And this really is an achievement, especially for somebody that did have difficulties throughout grade school and college with his academics.
Pretty quickly, during his residency, a number of things happen that really take his peers and his instructors aback. He is very resistant to any kind of constructive criticism, any kind of feedback. He tends to react very quickly and angrily to any of that if he's challenged in any way.
He had been a very bad resident. He behaved like a middle schooler. He was having constant conflicts with his professors.
He was reprimanded for yelling at a radiologist and losing his temper. And after this incident, as well as some other acts of unprofessionalism, his residency at this medical center was terminated.
Anthony goes home and he's very despondent, but he's very determined still to become a medical doctor and to finish a residency. And luckily for him, he gets a second chance. He is admitted to Creighton University, their pathology in Nebraska.
Unfortunately, he again falls to the same problems he did before in terms of lack of professionalism, having a short temper, and just really not meeting the grade of what's expected of a doctor.
And there was a physician there, Dr. Butra, who really thought of herself as a straight shooter. And she was very vocal in terms of giving him negative feedback in his evaluations. And this became a huge issue.
Dr. Hunter was trying to work with him. He was trying to get him to change his behavior. Dr. Hunter did not want to kick him out of this residency because he knew what a career killer that would be.
However, he is starting to see some of the same things that others are complaining about. Him being disrespectful to his other physicians, his teachers, him refusing to take responsibility, him alienating other medical students.
But finally, it got to the point where they had no choice. Garcia had attempted a prank against another resident who was taking a very high-stakes exam. Dr. Hunter, Dr. Brumback saw it as a clear effort by Dr. Garcia to sabotage this guy while he was taking this high-stakes exam.
Dr. Brumback, who is head of this department, and Dr. Hunter end up signing this termination letter.
So at that point, he was gone. That firing ended up dogging him throughout his career.
He does end up getting a residency in psychiatry in Illinois, in Chicago, but yet he is starting to unravel.
He's admitted into a mental health facility. He had thoughts about killing himself and killing others. He also was struggling with alcoholism.
He ends up leaving the psychiatric residency and once again going back to California. He applies for a license to practice in Louisiana.
Dr. Garcia had not revealed to LSU that he had been previously fired from any other residencies. And so that was the cause that LSU then gave for terminating him from his job there, because he had essentially lied to them about his background.
At this point, it's become pretty clear to Garcia that his medical career is on the verge of being over. And he begins to absolutely just stew about the fact that in his mind, all of these things are unfair.
Garcia was really craving revenge. He was being declined his license where he wanted to work, and he decided that he had to pursue whoever was preventing him.
He is really focused on the members of the pathology department at Creighton University. He is focused on Dr. Butra. He is focused on Dr. Brumback. And he is focused on Dr. Hunter. And he is incredibly angry. They had it out for him. He feels like they've sabotaged his career as a doctor.
That was a month before Tommy and Shirley were killed in the Hunter home. And so all of a sudden, the police had a potential trigger as to why Dr. Garcia, more than 7 years after he had been fired from Creighton would turn around and target Bill Hunter. Detective Derek Moyse had just kind of a general report run on Dr. Garcia, everything from does he have a criminal record, where does he live, what kind of vehicles does he drive. As he looked through this report, he saw something that was very striking to him. He saw that around the time of the Hunter murders, Dr. Garcia had driven a Honda CR-V, and that was very significant to him because the neighbors who had reported seeing this olive-skinned man coming and going from the scene reported that he had been driving a silver Honda CR-V. Now, the records that he had didn't show what color the car was, so then he kind of ran down the VIN of this car, and it came back SIL, silver. The key to the case came when the cell phone records came back. They saw right around the time of the Brumbach killings, there was only a single cell phone call in those records, and they didn't know anything about it other than the time of the call. And beyond that, there was just a geolocation. It placed Dr. Garcia's phone right across the river from Omaha. The credit card records came back, and they also placed him right in the Omaha area around the time of the Brumbach killings. It showed there was a purchase at a store called Gander Mountain. They made a subpoena and got the records for Gander Mountain, and sure enough, they showed that Anthony Garcia had bought a gun of the very same make and model that matched the pieces of gun that they had found inside the Brumbach home. They now knew Anthony Garcia had the motive to kill the Brumbachs. They now knew he had the means to kill him. They linked him to the gun, and they now knew he had the opportunity to do it as well because they had the phone records that placed him in Omaha. And that's when they knew we have everything we need to go after this guy. Even the arrest of Dr. Garcia kind of proved to be an adventure. The task force, and including FBI officers and Omaha police officers, they headed to a town in Indiana where Dr. Garcia was, but they were also tracking his cell phone. He had crossed over into Illinois, and he appeared to be headed south. They now knew he was crossing interstate lines. They were tailing him and trying to see what he was up to, and he continued to drive all the way through Illinois to the point where he was almost entering the state of Missouri, and they thought, we don't want him to cross into another state again. So they alerted the Illinois State Police that they wanted to stop this car. They stopped him after a very, very short pursuit, and they made the arrest.
I was actually in the grocery store with my kids, my two younger children at the time, getting some groceries, and I get a call from one of my uncles who tells me that they arrested a suspect in the case, and I'm like I just drop everything.
Derek Moyse, who was part of the task force, he then traveled to this town in southern Illinois to try to interview Dr. Garcia. Dr. Garcia, kind of refused to make any statements. But that while they were there, they also searched Dr. Garcia's car. And they found some pretty chilling things. They found another gun. They found directions on how to get to Louisiana State University, the other place where he had been fired from a residency before. They found his old lab coat from LSU, including the LSU logo.
The investigators firmly believe that he was on his way to kill more people that he held a grudge against. They find this note in the sink that is kind of wet, but they're able to kind of get it and read it. And it has all kinds of bizarre writings. And it's filled with violence, and it's filled with anger, and it's filled with talks about murder and homicide and those kinds of things. It really does, I think, paint a very grim picture of where he is and what his thoughts are consisting of at this point. This is a man who is increasingly focused on violence.
There were documents related to his firing from Creighton. It appeared to these detectives that Dr. Garcia had been attempting to destroy these documents before leaving again to go exact revenge against these other doctors who he felt had wronged him.
He was really throwing away all the money he had on drugs and escorts.
He had taken a shining to Cecilia Hoffman and was constantly trying to ask her on dates.
She didn't have any interest in him. And so to discourage him, at one point she goes, "Oh, Dr. Tony," as she called him, and everybody there did, "I could never date you because I only date really bad boys. And, you're a doctor, et cetera." And he said, "Well, I'm a bad boy too." And then he proceeds to tell her that he had murdered people in the past, a young boy and an older woman.
He essentially had confessed to her the killings of Tommy Hunter and Shirley Sherman. So this was huge. They right away knew Cecilia Hoffman is going to be a critical witness for us. Everything about this case took so long, It took 5 years for them to identify and catch him. And it took 3 years for the case to go to trial.
Initially, there was some talk from his defense team about trying some kind of diminished capacity or some kind of mental health defense. And it became evident that even though he clearly had some mental health issues, that those were not going to rise to the level of a legal defense in terms of an insanity plea or anything like that.
That was someone going on trial for the murder of 3 elderly people and a young boy. The prospect of a death sentence hung over it too.
The courtroom was packed. My family was there. My uncle Brad, he never missed a single day of that trial.
I don't think it's an understatement to say this was the biggest trial in the state of Nebraska in more than half a century. reporters from all over the country actually came to cover this trial because that's just how sensational this case was. I was there every day, and it was the most amazing trial that I've ever covered. The prosecutor made the decision to try him on all 4 murders at the same time. They decided to put them all together for 2 reasons. A, because of the similarity of the killings, because they thought that similarity would increase their chances of getting a conviction. When it came to the Hunter killings, they only had 2 things going for them, really. They had the fact that he was driving a car that was similar to the one that was seen, and the fact that he had olive skin, I guess. Garcia's attorneys also knew that Cecilia Hoffman was a very critical witness, and so he was set to do everything he could to impeach her and make her look like a dishonest person. And so the day that she took the stand in the trial, it was absolutely riveting. By this point, she had gotten away from being a stripper. She said, it was just a very bad time in my life. I was addicted to drugs. I was addicted to alcohol. Garcia's attorneys used all that against her, but she told the story of her cigarette break with Dr. Tony, where he had admitted to essentially the killings of Tommy and Shirley. Garcia's attorney went after her very hard and got to the point where he was almost screaming at her in the courtroom. He brought her to tears on the stand, and you could just look in the faces of the jurors. They were not happy about what this attorney had done to her.
He showed no emotion during the trial. Sometimes he'd have headphones on or something. He'd be writing stuff down, and every once in a while he'd lift up a headphone and talk to his lawyer. But other than that, he paid like 0 attention during that whole trial, especially all the witnesses going on the stand and testifying against him.
His behavior in court is just kind of bizarre. And I can only imagine the impact it had on the jurors. There's no indication that he has remorse.
It was just crazy. It's like, dude, you're on trial for 4 homicides. Wouldn't you want to be at least bit interested in what people are saying about you so you can rebuttal? So I don't know if he was doing it to put on a show, or I don't know if he was trying to make himself look incompetent. I'm not sure.
Essentially, it was a murder trial against him, and yet he really didn't seem that interested.
There were several physicians who talked about the possibility of Anthony Garcia having a personality disorder. When we look at Anthony Garcia and we see the amount of negative feedback and constructive criticism he received, and the fact that he refused over and over again to ever be introspective, to ever consider his role in anything, certainly implies somebody who's developed some very rigid and coping mechanisms that are consistent with what we see sometimes in a personality disorder.
When the jury came out, it was a unanimous guilty verdict. You could hear a lot of sighs, a lot of crying in the courtroom. You can hear the relief. You could actually feel it.
was a lot of back and forth on his mental state. And it appeared his mental state just kind of continued to deteriorate.
During the sentencing period, he had to be wheelchaired in, like he was asleep.
His eyes were shut the whole time. He never said a word or even looked up once during the entire sentencing phase. And we still don't really know what that was all about.
It all looked like a show, like an act, so maybe to sway the jury not to give him the death sentence, and we're not sure. Just a very weird person. To do what he did to four people, the way he did it, and you have no soul. Like you are soulless. You are the epitome of evil. I missed my weekly phone calls with my mom. I missed the family gatherings. I just miss her presence and her aura. I feel a lot of relief that he's never gonna see the light of day ever again. Never is gonna be let out to harm anyone again. He doesn't get to seek revenge on anybody ever again. That gave me at least some closure.
It's just tragic that you had these lives cut short because of the personal vengeance of someone who blamed others for his own personal failure.
Alan Morgan found his wife's body in the back storeroom of their shop when he and their two children returned from the cinema on Thursday night.
This is the position that she was left in.
Yeah, I mean, it's horrific, isn't it?
Carol's life was taken away from her at the age of 36. She deserves for the police to find who killed her.
Carol should still be alive today and enjoying her children and her grandchildren, and somebody's robbed that of her.
In over 40 years of investigative work, nobody had been charged with Carol's murder.
The attack that was sustained on Carol was so ferocious and so brutal.
We're investigating the murder that happened at the shop back in 1981.
Everyone that loved her deserves to know what happened to Carol.
The tragic element of this case is simply that it's not been solved. My case, if we ever get it there, is going to be circumstantial.
Yeah, it is. So, that's my overview. It's a bloody tough case.
This is one last attempt to try and get justice for Carol.
The scene of our offence is 61 Finch Crescent in Linslade. Carol was alone in the store at the time of the attack as her husband Alan and her two children, Dean and Jane, were out at the cinema. So in 1981, the original SIO focused very much on a burglary or a robbery that had gone wrong.
A man was seen about 500 yards from the shop in a motor car. He was seen to be clutching to his chest 2 plastic bags. It would appear at this stage that the bags contained the stolen money and the cigarettes from the shop.
That weapon that was used must have been a really sharp-bladed article to have caused such brutal injuries. Carol's still got her wedding ring on, and this was supposed to be a robbery, and if it was a robbery, why did they not take this stuff that would have been valuable?
Despite having an alibi checked and accepted by the police, Mr. Morgan can't convince some of his neighbours that he's innocent.
What are they saying about you now?
It's been offhand that I killed my wife. And as the police know themselves, and you yourselves know, well, I was in Luton, taking a kiss of the pictures.
Alan's alibi has been checked. His alibi is concrete. I have to accept that that's where he was. Our motive is essentially the classic love story. There's an ongoing affair between Alan and Margaret, and that the motive is embedded in that affair.
There was a fairly prolonged relationship, I think, between Alan and Margaret. There's anecdotal evidence that they were even found in bed the very next morning.
So this is Alan and Margaret after the murder. Then moved up north, and then they've gone on to get married.
My decision is to bring both Alan and Margaret in under arrest.
Hello, Alan, I'm from the police. I've come to arrest you this morning on suspicion of the murder of Carol Morgan.
I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder.
What?
And the murder of Carol Patricia Morgan.
I had no idea that anything like this was going to occur.
Do you have any information about who was responsible?
Oh, none at all.
Police are appealing for anyone with information, no matter how small, to get in touch and speak to the dedicated incident room.
Alan and Margaret have been released from police custody under investigation. It can be frustrating when you have to release suspects whilst the investigation continues, but particularly in the most serious of cases, we don't give up. There's been comprehensive media strategy which involved witness appeals, and as a consequence of that, a new witness has come forward with new evidence, potentially undermining Alan Morgan's alibi. We're scheduled for a 2-hour briefing today because there is lots and lots to go through. I'm going to hand over to Lindsay if you want to take us through all of the significant developments since we last met, please.
In terms of witnesses, we had a guy call into the incident room a couple of weeks ago, Michael Merrin, who lived in Leighton Buzzard at the time of the murder. Essentially, he has said that his brother sent him a message after Christmas with a picture of the poster from Linslade about the murder and said, what do you think about this? He's had a think about it and has made contact with us. And I've spoken to him, and he is saying that he was a regular at the shop. He knew Alan and Carol to talk to. He spoke to Alan on a regular basis about football and cars. He knew Alan's car by sight, and he knew Alan well enough to obviously have conversations regularly.
On the evening of the 13th of August 1981, took the turn around the roundabout towards Leighton Buzzard, and I see Alan Morgan on the other side of the road, 1, 2, 3 seconds, and he drove past in that direction, heading towards Finch Crescent. And I obviously carried on home. A couple of days later, when the local paper came out, it stated that she died on the Thursday evening and that the police weren't interested in Alan Morgan because he was at the cinema. And I turned to my mum and I said, well, that can't be right. I saw him on Thursday evening when we were driving back from the railway station at around 6:45. And my mum said to me, well, do you think you should go and tell the police that? And I said, I don't know, what do you think? And she said, well, if you're sure that you saw him. I said, Mum, I definitely saw him. So I made arrangements to go to Leighton Buzzard Police Station. And I told them what I'd seen, and they said, thank you very much for coming in, but at this moment in time, we've ruled Mr. Morgan out of our inquiry because he was at the cinema in Luton at that point in time. And that was, for me, the end of it. I know what my 18-year-old self saw, and I 100% am convinced, have always been convinced, that what I saw that night was Alan Morgan in his car.
Clearly, what we need to investigate and explore is whether we can prove or corroborate that information, because if Alan has come back to Linslade, then clearly that presents him the opportunity to murder Carol. So we made arrests in November of last year. Wherever they could rely upon, I can't remember that, that's what they did.
I see.
So the National Crime Agency have a number of specialists who I can ask for objective and independent advice that I can consider as part of my decision-making process. What I would say is that Alan was always considered to have an established alibi. He had taken the children to the cinema to a double bill, which we think would have run for about 4 hours.
Mm-hmm. They were at the cinema 4 hours and Dad would have sat next to him all the time? No.
There is doubt around,
Okay.
or there is the possibility that he could have done anything within that time,
okay.
and his alibi is not nailed on.
Oh, great.
And then that is called into question, because as recently as this year, a witness has come forward as a result of all of our media activity. There's a chap by the name of Michael Merrin.
Yeah.
He specifically says he sees Alan Morgan travelling back into Linslade in his car on the night of the murder. Now, I've got the team searching the 7,000 documents that we've got, but we just can't find any reference to Merrin or anything that Merrin may have provided to the original investigation team. This for me is a domestic homicide, layering lots and lots and lots of coincidences and lies, and but in terms of direct physical evidence, I'm not sure I'll ever. I'm not sure the golden nugget exists. Now, there is forensic work still ongoing, but I think this will always be a circumstantial case.
Going to your hypothesis then, Morgan and Spooner conspired together to do it.
Yeah.
So I get all that. What I'm not as clear on is, do you have a hypothesis or are you still working through that? Who's
as to who was the...
Yeah.
I haven't.
Okay.
I can't sit here. To this day, I'm not sure. I think either of them could have done.
Yeah.
I think they could have paid someone to do it. I really don't know. My case, if we ever get it there, it is going to be circumstantial.
Yeah, it is. So, it's a bloody tough case, isn't it? Let's be honest, from where it is. I concur with what your hypotheses are. The issue for me is how we get there, of course. And that's always the challenge, isn't it, you know?
I am Sian Saunders, Senior Crown Prosecutor in the Complex Casework Unit of the Crown Prosecution Service. My job is to decide whether or not there's a realistic prospect of conviction in a case and whether it's in the public interest to prosecute that case. This is an incredibly interesting case, but it's also going to be a very, very difficult case because witnesses may be dead and witnesses may not remember. So we are relying on an investigation that happened over 40 years ago. So it's going to be a very difficult case to prosecute.
We're just heading out to Linslade Cemetery to try and locate the gravestone of Carol Morgan. So in a cold case like this, I think it gives us some good background in relation to the family. So for us, it's quite important to try and find that out, who's put the gravestone down and what it says.
We're here, aren't we? Somewhere here.
No idea where this is going to be. I'm assuming we're looking for something a lot older.
Yeah, some of these look new and cared for.
This one?
The open book.
Here we go. Cherished memories of our beloved daughter Carol, forever in our thoughts.
And then the other side of the book
is blank.
Is blank. No mention of her being a mum or a wife.
Or a surname?
No. It's awful. Poor Carol. I think the fact that Morgan isn't on there suggests that maybe the parents wanted to disassociate her from the name, from him. I mean, could it suggest that they didn't have a very good relationship with him, or that they thought that he was involved in some way in her death?
Auntie Carol was someone who was a quiet, relaxed person, but bubbly. She was friendly. She always smiling. I just remember her always smiling. I remember a time when we didn't see Auntie Carol. This was after she married Alan Morgan. It was a couple of years after they married, they moved away to Leighton Buzzard, and we never heard from them again. We lost contact with them, and I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that he was so manipulative. I felt that he's had something to do with it. When I was younger, he just was a person that I didn't know him much, but whenever I saw him, he wasn't a person that was very friendly. He was nothing like Carol. She was open and kind, and he wasn't.
The investigation has stalled somewhat during the pandemic. So we recently reviewed all of the original witnesses who provided statements to the investigation back in 1981. There were a number of those witnesses that we hadn't been able to trace, hadn't been able to catch up with. And in the last week or so, we've been able to trace one of those witnesses who's provided significant information to the investigation. This was somebody that lived locally, somebody who was a child, i.e. under 18 years old at the time of the offence, and who not only knew our suspects, but also knew Carol, our victim. And I think at this stage, that's as much as I'm prepared to say. Obviously, when a witness contacts us, we have to have some conversation with them to ascertain what it is that they've got to say, what is their account. In this particular instance, the evidence that this individual started to talk about was so significant and so key and critical to our case that the officer deliberately stopped that conversation and said, I can't talk to you about this in any depth. We asked them to stop talking, and we asked them to wait until we're in a position to go and sit down with them and capture the entire account for the first time as much as possible on camera. And as we speak at this moment in time, those officers are with that witness and securing her account. Yes, massive, absolutely massive. Massive development for the investigation. We are very much, as a team, of the opinion that this is the piece of evidence that we have been looking for. This is the direct evidence that has evaded us so far.
Right then, and we're all good to go. Okay, and what do you think happened? What do I think happened to Carol? I think she had a fight. And lost the fight. Who would have wanted to fight her? Whoever it was really angry at her, hated her. And what makes you say that? Because of the way she was killed. It's a pretty savage way, isn't it?
And do you know anyone that might have wanted her dead? Yeah. Who? Her husband. And I suppose Margaret.
When I was 14, I got expelled from school, and Margaret was assigned as my tutor from the age of 14 to 16. I was in a pretty bad place. I was really, really struggling. And Margaret really helped with that. So I could talk about, you know, the sort of stuff you wouldn't talk to your mum or your dad about, you know. And yeah, she saved my life in some ways. I came to really admire Margaret and to respect her a lot, and I grew fond of her. It was at least 3 months before the murder. It could have been longer. I went to a pub called Dolphin, which no longer exists in Lane Buzzard. I met both of them there, and it wasn't just a casual thing. It was arranged by Margaret, and I couldn't really understand why. It led to a conversation about, well, I'd quite like Carol dead, from Alan. And then them talking about various ways and ruling them out, like insulin. Then there was car accident, and there was like, neither one of them knew enough about car mechanics to be able to do that. And what about the children? They could be in the car, etc. Looking at it through my adult eyes now, you know, why did it take you 42 years to speak up? But it's not as straightforward as that. It's like I was a 17-year-old mixed-up kid who didn't really know which way was up and had more than enough of her own problems. I found out that Carol had died. Margaret phoned me and told me. I was absolutely freaked out. And she was very keen to say, don't talk to anyone. She kept saying he didn't do it. And I kept saying, yeah, but I don't believe he didn't do it. You might believe that, but I don't believe that. I think he's capable of it. And he hated her. You know he hated her. And now I'm confused. Now I'm really frightened now. Because the one person I never considered that could have done it is her. In a million years. I never asked myself that. I never asked her that. I never questioned it. I totally 100% trusted that she was a good person. She would dream of doing that. She saved my life, you know. She'd been so good to me. She would never hurt anyone. And I don't know anymore whether I'm right. And it's killing me. I always hoped that I would have a chance, you know, that somebody would ask me, that the police would come to me. And I was pleased and relieved when my mum said, the police were here, came to see me and they want to speak to you. And I was like, hallelujah. Hallelujah.
To cut a really long story short, essentially she went to the Dolphin pub. She was driven there by Margaret and Alan was already there. They discussed that he hated Carol, he didn't want her in his life, and how could they get rid of her? There was a discussion around, if we did get rid of her, maybe we could do it with insulin. Then they discussed, well, maybe we could set up a car crash. And then they sort of said, well, actually, maybe we could get someone else to help. Looking back now as an adult, she now thinks they were trying to involve her in a conspiracy. And she was so frightened that she left the pub. Margaret then came after her and said, "Oh, what are you worried about? It's only a joke. It's only a joke. He's not going to do anything." And Jane categorically says that she believes that Alan would be capable of doing that, and she did think it would happen.
This is a huge step forward. This is the first time we've heard this direct evidence, so that absolutely supports the need to bring them in under arrest, and along with everything else, put this evidence to them. There's confirmation of a conspiracy, and there's direct evidence of overhearing that conspiracy being discussed. Still a long way to go, still a lot of work to do, but a kind of work to be done with a renewed vigour and with some more optimism now around what that might result in. Yeah, it's good. It's good development. We are in a different position this time round. You know, I accept that on that first arrest, you could almost say was almost like a bit of a fact find, really. And I think, if I'm being honest, we were in a position where they had the upper hand, as did their legal representation. And we're down in Brighton, and I think everything was kind of stacked against us. I see it very differently this time round. No, we're not popping down the road to Brighton. You're coming back to Bedfordshire, which is where the murder was committed. You know, this is a murder. This is a murder investigation, not some sweets that have been nicked off a shelf in your local co-op store. So you're going to come back to Bedfordshire and we're going to deal with you in Bedfordshire. You know, straight away, we are dictating this is what's happening. We are in control of this. This is our investigation and we are running it.
And it feels different this time, I think, to you.
Well, now we've got something to put to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of those being Jane. So, we've got things to talk about.
Detectives investigating the death of a woman near Leighton Buzzard nearly 40 years ago have arrested 2 people on suspicion of murder.
What can you tell me about Jane Bunting?
No comment.
Can you tell me a bit more about the relationship between you and Jane?
No comment.
So, Jane says that you were being quite open about the fact you wanted to get out of your marriage.
Okay, no comment.
Did you? Did you want to get out of your marriage?
No comment.
You never know what to expect when you go into an interview. We prepare for all eventualities. We prepare for people to say nothing, exercise their right to go no comment. But if someone is innocent, particularly of a murder, and they have played no part in the murder, one would expect them to be honest, transparent, detailed, and try and help you, particularly if it's your wife or someone that you love, and care about.
So she said some of the suggestions that you'd come out with were that you could use your insulin to kill her. Have you ever thought about doing that?
No.
That you could stage a car accident. Have you ever thought about doing that?
No.
You both then began to discuss various ways about killing Carol, about what if Carol had a car accident. Is this jogging any memories?
No.
Margaret?
No.
One of the things that you said is, I'd quite
I'm alleged to have said, not said.
Well, this is what I'm trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah,
Okay.
but you're
Did you
saying
say
I
that?
said it.
Okay.
But I'm alleged to have said it, but don't comment. I did not.
You did not? Okay, just tell me that then, if you didn't. I'd quite like my wife gone.
No,
You didn't say that, or you did say that?
I didn't say that. Oh, I don't know.
You don't know if you said it?
Don't comment.
Do you remember that you asked Jane not to talk to the police about this conversation in the pub?
No.
Did you ask her not to
No.
mention to the police?
I don't recall the conversation at all.
One of the things that Jane said to you in regards to about killing someone, that she could never do that,
And then you replied, and she said it was as cold as ice, I could.
Now, I'm sure now you can see, Margaret, why you're in custody today, because
Absolutely,
of what she's saying.
I do not recall any of those conversations, and I have said that all the way along.
Yeah. Because if her account is right, there is a conspiracy going on there. That's if her account is right, okay? Me frowning at me, but if her account is right, there's the conspiracy. It's a very serious.
I understand that.
Yeah?
I do understand
So you
that.
can see why now you're in custody today. Now, I'm glad you understand that.
Yes, I do. But
All right.
as I say, and I keep repeating it, I do not recall
I know you
any
keep
of
saying
these conversations.
you keep saying you do not recall any of these conversations, Margaret, but you're not saying they didn't happen.
Good. Dad? She can't keep to a no comment at all. She's advised again, but still couldn't help itself.
That is a bizarre response, isn't it? I don't recall
Yeah,
it. I don't
that's
recall it.
really bizarre.
You'd be like...
Because she goes no comment.
Yeah.
And so then I say, well, okay, let's clarify. You saying no comment because you don't remember, or are you saying no comment because you just don't want to say? No, it's because I don't remember.
It is a bizarre, because you know, what you'd expect is, no, that conversation didn't happen. That conversation has never happened.
No.
Don't know what she's talking
Weird.
about, but
Yeah.
to say, I don't remember it, it's not very credible, is it? We, so far in this investigation, are no nearer being able to prove who murdered Carol. However, we are remarkably close now to being able to prove that there was a conspiracy to have Carol murdered.
You then asked Jane if her boyfriend would know anyone who would kill Carol.
Did he? I don't know. I don't. No.
Did they approach somebody who was known to them, or indirectly or directly? Were they able to recruit for want of a better phrase, a hit person to carry out the murder? It's not something we can answer with any degree of certainty at the moment. There's only Alan or Margaret that can tell me if somebody was paid by them to murder Carol.
Jane said that she felt like she was being drawn into a conspiracy, something that she didn't want to be part of, something that you wanted her to be part of. Is that right?
No comment.
Did you want Jane to be part of plans to murder your wife?
No comment.
Was that your goal that evening?
I've put a phone call into the Crown Prosecution Service just to consider the charging decision. I know that the interview teams are kind of there and chomping at the bit, and they'd really like to see us go for a charge, but at the moment my thoughts are that they're likely to be released under investigation.
We now have a significant amount of evidence that suggests that Alan and Margaret Morgan were involved in this offence. But I can't charge the case until I'm absolutely sure that there's nothing in the material from the 1981 case that might undermine our case against Alan and Margaret. And so I've advised the police to complete a review of all the paperwork from the 1981 case. The decision to charge has to be right, and it has to be right first time in a case like this. And it's my decision, and one that I have to be prepared to stand by. And until the case is ready, I'm not prepared to make a charging decision.
A man and a woman in their 70s arrested in connection with the death of a woman near Leighton Buzzard nearly 40 years ago have been released under investigation. The body of 36-year-old...
Police say while no one has ever been charged, they remain committed to finding out the truth for Carol's family.
It's a huge undertaking to review all of the investigation material, but it's so important that it's done properly, and it's so important that it's given the right time. It can make or break your case. Today's effectively D-Day, if you like. Today is the day where I find out whether 4.5 years of investigative work is going to result in a prosecution. So this is us having a conference with CPS and council now that they're in receipt of our full evidential case, and asking, OK, are we going to prosecute this? Are you going to give me a charging decision? Are we going to court?
So we are moving closer to being able to reach an ultimate decision on the critical question of whether there is a case to go to a jury or there isn't.
This is a complex case which relies on the person presenting it to a court understanding the fine detail and being able to explain to a jury how those small pieces of evidence fit together into the bigger picture. Whilst the decision as to whether or not to prosecute is always going to be one for me, it's incredibly helpful to have an opinion from Pavlos because he is known to have worked on large and complex cases in the past.
Okay, so this has been the most thorough re-examination of this case. And if there's a case, there'll be a case of conspiracy to murder against Alan Morgan, Margaret Morgan. And if there's a case to charge against them both, I think everyone will agree that there is more evidence in relation to Alan than there is in relation to Margaret, albeit that she's inextricably linked given her close relationship with Alan Morgan. So the case that I've advised in favour of charging, which the Crown Prosecution Service will review, is that Alan Morgan and Margaret Morgan conspired together and with the person who killed Carol Morgan to murder her, and that was done by offering payment, which was made to somebody who then committed murder.
Of course I want to catch the person that murdered Carol. Of course we do. But there's no direct evidence about who that somebody was. There really are only two people that know the answer to that question. And they're the two people that we're investigating for the conspiracy to murder Carol.
In order to prove a conspiracy, we only have to prove that there was an agreement to kill. So in this case, we would be alleging that Alan and Margaret found somebody and paid them to kill Carol.
So busy. But come on in and meet the team. Alongside the normal lines of inquiry and investigation that my team have been conducting, one area of investigation that we used was that on each occasion that Alan and Margaret were arrested, we would record any conversation that they have with each other.
What are you going to say?
Because I need to win.
I say, what are you going to say? We don't know, see? I don't know anything. What's the pictures?
So the evidence contained no admissions of guilt, no conversation that lends itself to what actually happened on the night or who was actually responsible, but their behaviour, their comments to each other, the general demeanour and discussion they have is absolutely of assistance to our case.
I don't understand anything about else.
Alan says to Margaret, I don't want to say anything because they might have.
And then they go quiet.
You heard that?
Yeah.
What was it that he might say that he wouldn't want the police to hear? These are potentially significant, suspicious comments, and I'd be interested to hear, if they're brought in for further interviews, what explanation they give.
In light of the recorded evidence and along with the review of all of the investigation material, it enables me to have Alan and Margaret rearrested for the conspiracy to murder Carol.
Morning.
Morning. Margaret.
Yeah. Oh, Winnie, wait.
Is Alan here as well?
Oh, yeah. Hello.
Can we come in, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Is he up?
No.
Oh, okay.
Winnie, come get.
Just going to come up. It's the police.
Alan? Right, I need you to listen to me, okay? Following your previous arrests and release, okay, a number of inquiries have been conducted over a period of time. As a result of those inquiries, I'm now arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder Carol Patricia Morgan on or before the Thursday, the 13th of August, 1981.
So I'm arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to murder, okay? And that is the murder of Carol Patricia Morgan on or before the Thursday, the 13th of August, 1981. Right. Okay?
So the plan today is that yourself and your wife are going to come with us. We're going to go to Bedfordshire Police Headquarters, where you're going to be interviewed throughout the day. Okay? And then decisions will be made thereafter. So I need you to get yourself dressed and ready to go, please.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
All right. That's everything.
Do it, love.
Just don't tell me.
Yeah, I know. To be honest, love, I don't know what they've done.
You must have seen it.
You're right. Yeah. Our suspects were arrested this morning. They've been transported back up to Bedfordshire, so we're awaiting their arrival. I just need to check in with the team and see what's happened, what I need to be aware of, and make sure that everything's running as it should be. This will be the final stage of our investigation. And the fact that our lawyer, Charles Saunders, from the Crown Prosecution Service, is present here with us is very encouraging.
On the basis of the material I have already and the review of all the material that's been undertaken, I'm almost in a position where I can make a charging decision. The police have now gathered this evidence from the recordings, and it's really important that I understand Alan and Margaret's view and explanation of that recording before I make a charging decision.
So this is a conversation between you and Alan on the 27th of November, so when you were first arrested. So it's difficult to hear, but you shush there and you whisper something outside as well.
To Winnie, probably. That sounded like.
From the point of view it looks from me, this looks very suspicious. Is there anything, you'd laugh about it, but...
I know I'm laughing
is
about
there, is
it,
there
but
anything...
no comment.
Well, tell me why I'm getting that wrong.
No comment.
You lower your voice for that part when you're shushing him, and you whisper something to him deliberately so he can't hear, and then you raise your voice back up again, either side saying, I need a wee.
Don't know.
So we can't hear what you're saying.
As I have said before, on every occasion, I am absolutely nothing to do with it.
So why would an innocent person do that? Why would you shush someone that's trying to get their story straight for the police? Why not protest your innocence? She started with, I need a wee, and then finished with, I'm going to say I need a wee.
No comment.
To cover the shushing and then whispering in the middle.
No comment.
Why is it you find this funny, Alan?
I'm going to say something now. No, you don't have to. I am. Have you ever been in this situation that I'm in now?
Thankfully not.
Right.
I'm not sure I'd laugh.
No, if you wouldn't like it.
Right.
It doesn't matter what I say.
We agree on that.
All right?
Yeah.
Whatever I say,
yeah,
or whatever you say.
The problem is you're not saying anything else.
No. I'm trying.
Well, you just go no comment.
No, shit. I know I'm not saying no comment because I'm frightened of what you're going to do even if...
What we're doing is trying to get your...
No, you're not. You're trying to incriminate me in doing whatever.
How?
I don't know.
Nor do we, because we're not trying to...
Can we just have a break?
Okay.
The only people that have benefited from Carol's death are you and Alan, Margaret. Nobody else.
How many times do I have to keep saying I have had nothing to do with this?
The only person that can benefit from this is you and Margaret, and which is exactly what happened. She moved in a short while later. You played happy families and moved away a couple of months later. The shop was sold up and bought and paid for, and then you went on to buy another shop, and everything was fine after that. Is there anything you want to tell us?
No comment.
She was probably advised to go no comment, but in true Margaret style, she couldn't do that. She reiterated several times that she wasn't involved, that he wasn't involved.
She's not denying that what we're telling her is happening.
She just can't explain it.
She just said, I don't remember the conversation, I don't know why I would do that. I said, do you agree that what we've read out is what's been played to you? And she's like, yeah, that's definitely me shushing. That's definitely in doing what you're saying. But I just don't remember the conversation, and I don't know why I would do that. But we're totally innocent. That's all the way through. We're totally innocent. However, if I was a third person, I'd think the same as you.
Okay. No, if you're innocent, you know you're innocent. You protest your innocence, and you have nothing to hide. You're not worried about anybody recording you.
So it's mainly no comment, and he did stay no comment this time because every time he went to talk and he did want to talk, the solicitor just tapped him on the side.
Yeah, I mean, we've probably suggested, like, the shushing, I don't want to say anything because you're clearly aware that it's been recorded. You've clearly got something to hide, and you're not telling us. You're clearly involved in some way with Carol's murder, but you're just not prepared to tell us about it. No comment. So I was like, well, that speaks for itself.
I think that brings us to you, Sean, and whether...
You're all sitting there hoping,
well,
aren't you?
what do you... Is there anything else you need from us?
No.
What do you need?
I don't need anything else.
OK.
So I think I've got it all, and I don't think that anything that they've said today changes anything that we've previously discussed or thought about over the last 5 years. I think we're happy that there's nothing in there that's going to catch us out, which is the most important thing. Nothing at trial that's suddenly going to come out that we don't know about. With that in mind, I think there is enough evidence to charge both of them with conspiracy to murder.
Excellent.
And I just need to finish off the advice. It's pretty much done, and I will be able to hit the button.
To finally get to that point where an independent decision maker is saying, yeah, we're going to charge, the evidence is sufficient to charge, it's a huge, huge relief, but it's also a great deal of satisfaction.
Hello again. Okay, so CPS have come back with a charging decision to charge you with one offence. This officer here is going to read out the charge.
On the 13th of August 1981 at Leighton Buzzard in the county of Bedfordshire, you conspired together with Margaret Morgan to murder Carol Morgan.
So, in relation to that charge, Alan, do you want to make a reply?
Not guilty.
Okay.
Carol was a really, really ordinary woman, and I don't say that unkindly. She was just an ordinary woman doing a really ordinary job in a really quiet housing estate. And she died in a most extraordinary way. And actually, if you take out of the picture the robbery hypothesis and look at it, who else had a motive to kill her? Who else would have wanted her dead? And why was she killed with such ferocity? So it comes down ultimately to motive. And then really the only people who needed or wanted her dead were Alan and Margaret. It gave them what they needed. It gave them what they wanted. They wanted to be together, and there wasn't any other way. It's horribly simple, but devastating and very sad for Carol and Carol's family.
You are charged with the following offence. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention now something which you later rely on in court. Anything you do so may be given in evidence. On the 13th of August 1981 at Leighton Buzzard in the county of Bedfordshire, conspired together with Alan Morgan to murder Carol Morgan.
In relation to that charge, do you want to make a reply?
Wish to plead not guilty.
Not guilty, okay.
I did Alan, and then she did. Kelly did Margaret.
Not guilty.
Yeah, they both said exactly the same. Both said not guilty straight away. Yeah.
Just because we've charged them, they ain't going to suddenly roll over and say, "Oh yeah, all right, you're right," are they? So
that's done.
Good. From the outset, I always thought we had a good chance of detecting this and seeing Alan and Margaret charged with this offence. I'm just pleased for the team because they've worked so hard on this. I get a great deal of satisfaction out of knowing they will feel elated as to what we've achieved today. So now that we have charged Alan and Margaret, it's time to prepare for a Crown Court trial. So today is our first day of the trial at Luton Crown Court. Do I believe that Alan and Margaret are involved in Carol's murder? Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. I think they're involved, have orchestrated it. But it doesn't matter what I think, does it? It's the jury that determine that.
A trial many feared would never see the light of day finally got underway, almost 43 years after Carol Morgan was hacked to death and found on a shop floor in the town of Linslade.
42 years after his second wife, Carol, was found repeatedly struck with an axe or a machete, Alan Morgan and Margaret Morgan, who was his lover at the time and is now his third wife, arrived at Luton Crown Court to face charges of conspiracy to murder, charges they both deny.
Telling a story through the structure of a trial is always hard, but here we've got decades that have passed. And so what I really want the jury to be able to understand is the nature of that illicit affair that Alan and Margaret were having with each other, and also understanding the evidence that either or both of them conspired with another killer to commit the murder of Carol Morgan.
Jurors in the trial of a couple accused of conspiracy to murder have retired to consider their verdict. The couple, who are in their 70s, have been on trial at Luton Crown Court for the past 8 weeks.
The jury are in their room, deliberating. We have no idea. The whole process is sacrosanct, locked down. Only they know what they're talking about. It could still go one or two ways. The worst possible outcome, I think, for everyone would be a hung jury, because I'm fairly confident we would go again if that panned out. And that brings a whole rehash of all the stresses and trials and tribulations we and the witnesses have been through.
All the evidence suggests that we've got the right people. So unfortunately, I think if it becomes back as not guilty, that'll be the end of it. There won't be any, it will remain open, but there's no evidence to suggest any other routes or lines of inquiry.
It's a nerve-wracking time for everyone involved, but obviously this is the summation of years of work for us. So it's a bit, you just don't know what's going to happen, so it's just a waiting game, really.
Well, everything is at stake. Everything's at stake. This is, this has been a 6-year journey for me. It's been a 43-year journey for justice for Carol Morgan and Carol Morgan's family. So everything's at stake. It's the first time anybody's been charged, stood trial in relation to Carol's murder. So the outcome of this is really significant. After a 6-year investigation and a 43-year journey for justice for Carol Morgan, we finally got our verdict. Alan Morgan has been convicted unanimously of conspiracy to murder Carol Morgan. The jury were out deliberating for almost exactly 1 week, and they've acquitted Margaret Morgan of conspiracy to murder. She's free, she's at liberty to go and get on with her life as she sees fit, but clearly that life will now be without Alan Morgan.
The verdict against Margaret is one that the jury came to. I can't go behind that. They heard all the evidence, they made their decision. I have no way of knowing what it was that made them come to that conclusion. But the evidence against Alan was always going to be stronger.
Alan Morgan, you fall to be sentenced for conspiracy to murder your wife, Carol Morgan, who was savagely killed on the 13th of August 1981. Only one person knows the identity of the murderer, and that is you, Mr. Morgan. That is the secret which you have harboured for the last 40 years. The law has now caught up with you, and you must pay due punishment for your part in this crime. There's only one truly wicked person who's been in this court, and that is you, Alan Morgan. For conspiracy to murder, I sentence you to imprisonment for life. Taking into account the aggravating and mitigating factors to which I have referred, the minimum term to be served shall be 22 years. You may be taken down.
Margaret, is there anything you'd like to say? Your reaction to the sentence?
I'm really pleased with the sentencing. We couldn't have asked for more. I was somewhat surprised. I was concerned that the minimum term was going to be a lot less than 22 years. I think it sends out a fantastic message.
The sentence was a just one, in accordance with the law as it was at the time. Whilst it's going to be difficult for Alan to spend 22 years or the rest of his life in prison, it's only fair that he has to be punished for what he did to Carol.
And Carol's life was taken away so suddenly, so shockingly. She didn't deserve any of this, and she should be living her life to the full.
Carol has missed out on seeing her children grow into adulthood, seeing them have successful lives, seeing them become parents and becoming a grandparent. She has been robbed of all of that. I'm obviously pleased with the conviction of Alan. However, our efforts to bring anybody else who has played a part in this conspiracy to justice will continue, because I think we owe Carol that.
I was home in bed, and I received a call at approximately 1 to 1:30 in the morning. A neighbor saw a fight going on out in front of the residence on Elm Street. There was a man on the sidewalk in front of the residence, and he was motionless. I'm just trying to get there as fast as I can. So when I arrived at the scene, there was a body lying on the sidewalk, and there was a mask between his legs. The deputies were on the scene, and they were very, very spooked. They described going into the house and locating one body and locating another body, and described it almost like a Freddy Krueger coming out of a closet. And these were big, muscular type of deputies. They didn't scare easy. And when I went in, and I see exactly what they were talking about. I've never seen anything like that in my life.
That night, I believe it was a Sunday night, between 1 and 2 o'clock in the morning, I was notified by dispatch of a homicide. I got out of bed and jumped in the shower real quickly, and by the time I left the door, I had been called 4 different times, adding another body to the crime scene. Then I drove to the address on Elm Street in Salida. Most homicide scenes, there's always going to be evidence. You just have to find it. And the first 48 hours are the most important to get that case solved.
Deputies were telling me that they had located 4 bodies at the scene. At first, I didn't believe him because I've never been involved in a quadruple homicide, and I don't recall a quadruple homicide ever occurring in Stanislaus County. So there was no lights in the house. It was really very horrific, a lot of blood. Obviously, the person lying on the sidewalk was deceased. He was a white male adult. There was 3 bodies inside of the residence. 2 of them were in the kitchen, and 1 was in the living room. All of the victims were bludgeoned with some type of blunt instrument, in addition to a signature stab wound and slices to the throat area.
It was a bloody scene, but as an investigator, you don't care about how ugly it is, how much blood is there. These are their bodies. They're part of this puzzle.
We identified 3 of the victims with ID that they had on the persons. One had been Franklin Raper, who was 51 years old, Richard Ritchie, who was 25 years old, and Dennis Caldwell, who was 35 years old. The one that we did not identify right away was a female, young female, about 22 years of age. Her injury to her neck was so horrific that she was almost decapitated. Myself and other investigators were all wondering how these people all related. We had no idea who knew each other because of the different ages.
immediately, it didn't look like home invasion or robbery because these people are brutally murdered. The people that did this wanted to kill people. Their objective was to kill these people.
As far as who was capable of committing a quadruple homicide, just almost unheard of, especially in Salida. So at that point, we had no idea who the perpetrators were. I observed a camouflage mask in between the legs of the man who was lying deceased on the driveway. And there was another camouflage mask lying on the grass at the residence.
There was a knit cap that was on the lawn, and when I looked at it, there was hair on it. DNA wasn't around much at that time. You know, it was just in the beginning stages of it. But, you know, we could still match that hair, blood type, and stuff like that. So that was a good piece of evidence.
I observed footprints leading from some dirt area near the gutter of the house. And that was going eastbound toward the railroad tracks.
Following the footprints, there was a bat, a K-bar knife, a knife sheath that they discarded. That tells me that there's more than one person that did this. So there was a trail, if you will, of evidence to where they went to a vehicle and then left the scene.
A lot of the locals heard about it. The large crowd were outside the crime scene, actually the perimeter of the crime scene.
Salida wasn't a very large town in those days. It was a small farming community just north of Modesto. I was a reporter at the Modesto Bee, and I covered crime. And as soon as we heard about it, everybody went out and started covering it. It just rocked the town.
The deputies know what to do. They're basically freezing the crime scene, make sure nobody comes in and out.
They're taping off the area and talking to people. The lady came up, she was visibly shaken, and said, "Hey, I'm the sole survivor. I was there when it happened."
The killers didn't know they had missed somebody, and they had missed her. So we had a witness, a survivor, if you will, right at it.
Pure evil came to the house on Elm Street that night, and I don't think detectives expected to find what they did. By the next morning, everybody in Salida knew about the massacre on Elm Street. It was just a horrible crime. It was a bloodbath. There was a lot of fear. They were afraid at that point that, hey, what's going on here? Somebody gonna bust into my home and kill all my family? They had no idea yet who the killers were. So it was tense. Luckily, there was one survivor.
Her name was Donna Alvarez, and I interviewed her for approximately an hour. Donna Alvarez told me that that was her first night being at that residence. She had never been there before. She said she was somewhat homeless. She had no place to go, and she arrived at the residence with one of the victims, Richard Ritchie, and Franklin Raper, who was living in the residence, told her she can spend the night there. So she was in one of the bedrooms. And all of a sudden, she heard screaming. She wasn't sure what was going on other than it was dark, and she knew something bad was happening. She looked out the door and saw everybody had a camouflage mask on. One of the individuals removed his mask briefly, and she said was obviously a Caucasian, but he had afro type of hair.
And he had a gun and told her to get into the living room. And then somehow he was distracted.
She felt that she got to get out of there, so she went. The only place she could go was to the garage.
She then hid under a pile of laundry that was on the floor of the garage.
After hearing all the commotion, she said it got quiet, and she found out that everybody was murdered except for herself.
Apparently, during the murder frenzy, they forgot about her, and she was able to slip out of the garage. I think the garage door was broken, and she was able to get under it and run to a neighbor's house. He called 911.
Then I was walking outside the crime scene, made contact with a lady who stated that her daughter has been unaccounted for, and she hopes that the victim was not her daughter.
And she said, I heard my daughter might be one of the victims. And they said, well, can you identify anything about her? And they said, well, she's real small and got dark hair, has a little tattoo on her.
She had brought a photograph to us of her daughter. And based on that photograph, we were able to identify the young female victim as being the lady's daughter, Darlene Paris.
These people all had families. A couple of them were married, and it was just real sad for the families that their loved ones were butchered like that.
That night, I just had a weird feeling, like I was uneasy. I don't know. I remember hearing the phone probably 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was my brother saying, Dad's gone. And I just, I think I fainted. I don't know, I just went down hard. And it just was this devastation.
I woke up from a dead sleep at that time, and I heard my mom sobbing, and she was on the phone, crying uncontrollably. We turned on the TV, and there it was. Bodies coming out of the house. It was right there. It was kind of stunning. You know, you're never going to see your grandpa again. I knew him as Papa Red. Franklin Raper, Papa Red. He liked us to call him Papa Red.
My dad was very giving and loved his family, and his family also included what he would call his people, which were not necessarily blood related. But if they needed him to take care of them, he would step in and try to protect them as best as he could.
He would want to bring people into the home, that didn't have a place to go. But my mom just couldn't handle that because she had 3 kids. They did split up. It was tough for him to deal with.
I remember at that time, it was kind of like, what are you going to do, Papa? Like, where are you staying at? And he said, well, I'm staying close in Salida. But he was having issues with some people. I knew he was having some issues. Because I heard my mom maybe a couple weeks before that saying, Dad, can you please come up here and just move up here with us and get out of the area for a while?
Detectives got a lead that Franklin had been in a fight with a gentleman that owned a repair shop there in Salida.
They had some bad blood between them. There was several altercations over a year's time, and they actually got in a fist fight.
And Franklin came back to the shop after they had had some words, and he was in a car with another guy, and they started spinning donuts outside the shop.
And unfortunately, Franklin's vehicle died And so the owner of the repair shop confronted Franklin.
They beat Franklin up pretty good.
Basically, Franklin lost the fight.
So I tracked him down by this auto parts place. He was, not feeling too great. And I asked him, Dad, what's going on? And he said, these guys are a bunch of punks. I didn't know who they were or had never met them or anything, but I was, quite worried about him.
Detectives zeroed in on the shop owner, tracking down all the problems he'd had with Franklin. They thought this could be the motive.
The individual who owned an automotive store is one of the persons that actually committed the murders, and he was dangerous.
They didn't know what they were going to find, but if they were the killers, they were pure evil. Detectives started running down leads and chasing suspects, and they found out one of the victims, Franklin Raper, had had a beef with a guy that owned an auto body shop there in Salida.
So we went to the automotive repair shop and met with the owner and asked him if he heard about the quadruple homicide in Salida. And he tells me that everybody in Salida knows about it. He was asked if he had anything to do with it, and he admitted that he did not get along with Franklin, and him and Franklin did not like each other, but no way that he would kill Franklin Raper or anybody else.
He had an alibi. He was home with his wife and family and in bed at the time of the murders.
His family was interviewed, and they checked out his alibi. We determined that there was no indication that he would kill Franklin Raper.
So they let him go. At this point, the town was on edge. They couldn't believe it. Salida's a nice little town. And here's this horrendous murder of 4 people. Everybody was afraid.
I was in the 5th grade with Darlene's half-sister, younger half-sister. We realized that we were both part of this crime. My grandfather was a victim. Her older sister was a victim. For her being a sister and being so close like they were, it was definitely something I noticed impact her big time from a change from when I knew her before. We were going through different therapy sessions, in school counseling, and connecting on our own. It was devastating for that family. It really was. It was devastating for everybody. These guys nobody's going to be able to catch them. Are they going to find out who did it? So it was a lot of fear at that time, a lot of fear.
Nobody knew who the killers were. They didn't know if they were going to be next. It was a rough time. Detectives started looking elsewhere. They went to Franklin's family.
I interviewed Franklin Raper's son, and he told me that Franklin Raper asked his son if he could borrow a gun.
And the son said, "Why? Why do you need a gun, Dad?" And Franklin says, "Well, I'm afraid of this guy, Jason LaMarche." And Franklin was no sissy, so to be afraid of some guy, his son thought, this guy must be a bad hombre. And turns out he was.
Jason LaMarche was a bully.
My grandpa would talk about him, and I know there was some bad blood there.
Jason LaMarche had stolen Franklin's car, put it out in the street, set it on fire. So then Franklin knew, hey, this is serious. I need to protect myself. Jason LaMarche, he's threatened to kill me.
I knew that his car had been burned up, and they pulled him out of the car and broke his collarbone. So I went to see him. I actually had tried to give my dad to move. I cried and pretty much begged. I said, "You need to get out of this area, Dad. It's really this is too much. You can stay with us." He said, no, I've been in this town a lot longer than they have, and they're not going to run me out. He said, I'm good with the man upstairs. And he looked me right in the eye and said, don't worry, and I'll be okay. And that was the last time I saw him. So, but I always felt that I at least tried. I tried to give him that option, you know, to get out of there.
So we really wanted to locate Jason LaMarche and find out exactly what was going on and interview him. So I immediately called the sheriff's office and ran a background check, and we discovered that he had been arrested before, which indicates that we have a photograph of him. And I showed Dawn Alvarez, who was in the house that night, the photo lineup, and asked her if she can identify the person she saw at the crime scene. She immediately pointed to Jason LaMarche. She became hysterical, just as if Jason LaMarche was there in person.
Well, in trying to track LaMarche down, detectives contacted LaMarche's girlfriend, Michelle Evan, and his girlfriend didn't know where he was. Or she said she didn't. But they learned that her sister, Tanya Miller, had also been living in that house where the murders occurred, but she was staying with her mother that night.
We thought that we had to find her and interview her to find out if there was any connection between her and the murders itself. Tanya Miller was stricken. She had no idea why somebody would come in and commit these murders. At that point, we confirmed that she was not there. No indication that she participated in the murders or had any knowledge what had occurred.
They asked her, do you know Jason LaMarche? She said, yes, my sister dates him.
She did not like him. She did not like her sister hanging out with Jason LaMarche because he brought her into a group of people that she did not like.
And these people, they have been known to cause trouble.
The group was living in a little ramshackle ex-labor camp that had been abandoned there in Salida.
It was called the camp.
She stated that Franklin Raper actually lived at the camp for a while, and then when he left the camp, she allowed him to stay at the residence on Elm Street to get away from the people that lived at the camp.
So the detectives decided, well, we're going to see for ourselves what's going on.
And so we went out talking to people, gathering information.
The community felt like they didn't want anything to do with those people. They could see armed guards walking around the perimeter of the place. They had heard rumors that there was satanic rituals being held there. The community didn't really know what these people were all about. They were just afraid of them.
Well, after we had developed this information, we're going to go there and, talk to them and see where they were last night.
We arrived, I think it was about 5 o'clock in the morning. The camp itself was probably estimated maybe a half-acre big, and the back of the residence was looked like a 2-bedroom wooden construction home.
When they got there, no one was there.
There was a clothesline in front of the house.
And they go, camouflage clothing, that's what the killers were wearing.
And we were kind of real concerned about our safety.
We had to be aware of the danger that's out there. They were vicious people. Whatever triggers them, they can strike. And they strike at any time.
If that was a group that actually committed the murders, they probably would have no problems killing us.
You've got a bunch of people living here in the camp, and Jason LaMarche is one of them, and he's a prime suspect. So the detectives didn't know what they were going to find. And then a man came up and started talking to the detectives. He said he was named Gerald Cruz.
We learned that Gerald Cruz was the leader of the cause.
He was a big man. He was 300 plus. We started talking to Mr. Cruz.
And I asked him if he had heard about the quadruple homicide in Salida, and he said no, he hadn't heard about it.
I don't know anything. What are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. You know.
Which I thought was very strange because everybody in Salida had heard about it.
As an investigator, you can tell when people are lying to you. Something's not right here. What immediately struck me was his shoes had a couple of very, very small specks on them that, in my mind, could be blood.
I told myself that I believe this guy could very well be one of the suspects in the homicide. I asked him if Jason LaMarche lived on the property, and he pointed to a trailer that Jason would stay in. But he said he was not home, and he stated no, he does not know where he's at.
Now, walking back, I know what I was thinking, and I knew that, all right, there's something here, and start putting a search warrant together. And at the same time, we're going to watch this place. We found weapons that were illegal, bomb-making materials, explosive materials that were illegal.
Now they're really concerned.
We weren't sure what the intent was, other than somewhere down the line, maybe they were going to do something else. We also found books on Satanism and astrology, a different type of material such as that. People that actually were in the cause actually were forced to get their finger cut and put their fingerprint in this book that Gerald kept. And they were forced to write a diary, and he would read the diaries because in his mind, he thought, well, if I know what they're thinking of, then I can control them better.
And then detectives found things that were beyond their wildest nightmare.
There was a will, a punishment will that we found.
It was called the Wheel of Punishment. And when Cruz thought somebody had done wrong or had screwed up, he would throw it in the air and have them catch it.
Wherever their thumb landed, that was a punishment they got.
He would discipline them by doing things like withholding food, withholding clothing, making them sleep on the concrete without any type of blanket or anything. He would use forced sodomy. He would use oral copulation.
It could be all kinds of bizarre happenings, whatever Gerald came up with.
It would dehumanize the people that were under him. And they would look to him for everything, for their basic needs. Gerald Cruz would exhibit a lot of the traditional types of manifestations that cult leaders exhibit. Mind control, physical torture, financial control, sexuality. His group dynamics were based upon his ability to control everybody around him. They were under the influence, the mental influence of Gerald Cruz.
That was scary.
So after the search warrant was conducted, we found receipts where they had purchased a K-bar knife and where they had purchased a camouflage mask. Everything was falling into line as to leading to the suspects at the camp being the perpetrators of the homicide. But we don't have the suspects in custody.
Now they just needed to find out who was involved out of the group there and what what their participation was.
Now we're on day, I believe day 2 or 2.5, and none of us have been to bed yet. So I told Sergeant Larson that I was going to get a few hours sleep, because if we did catch these suspects, one of us had to be somewhat coherent in order to interview them. When I got up, I had learned that Michelle Evans was booked for murder.
Michelle Evans was Jason LaMarche's girlfriend, and her sister, Tanya Miller, had also been living there in that house on Elm Street, so there was that connection.
Michelle Evans was very nervous. She was avoiding questions. She did not provide any information as to either her involvement or anybody else at that time.
We found out at that time she was a good friend of David Beck, and Beck was also at the camp.
Jason LaMarche, Beck, and Cruz were the main characters at the camp.
So we arrested Beck and brought him in. Mr. Beck, Dave Beck, he wouldn't tell us anything, of course, denied it, and so did Michelle Evans. And so we put them in the same interview room, and that led to a big break in the case.
So this was a real rock they flipped over out there, and all the snakes came out. Detectives needed to find out who was involved in the murders of Franklin Raper, Darlene Paris, Rich Ritchie, and Dennis Coldwell, the massacre on Elm Street. They're starting to gather people up, and bring them in for questioning.
We arrested David Beck and brought him in, and also Michelle Evans. And we put them in the same interview room. That's an age-old tactic used by investigators. And she went in there and started talking in a low voice and telling him that she did not tell us that anything about him being involved. And Mr. Beck was doing everything with his hand motions without saying anything for her to shut up. But she kept talking.
And after that conversation, I immediately conducted my own interview with Michelle, see what, if any, information that I could obtain. After back and forth for approximately 1 hour, Michelle finally cracked and agreed to tell me exactly what happened. Michelle Evans told me the night before they committed the murders, they had a bonfire at the camp, and they all were basically psyching themselves out going over to kill Franklin Raper. He was the target at that time. Besides Franklin Raper, everybody else was at the wrong place at the wrong time. The suspects had no idea who was going to be there, but they were instructed by General Cruz not to leave any witnesses. Everybody is to be killed.
She told them that when Franklin first moved onto the property there at the camp, he was friends with Gerald and the other members. But he didn't like what was going on. He didn't like the brutality of Cruz hurting other people.
They tried to get him to kind of be roped into this kind of thing, and there was no way he was having it. I think he thought they were capable of a lot of evil.
So he was done, and he tried to get other people when he left to leave with him. And that's why they were over at the house that night. Those were people that he helped get out of there, and they kind of had their own little group, and that was really ticking Cruz off.
Franklin wasn't afraid to stand up to Cruz, and I think that's one of the reasons why Cruz had to eliminate him as a threat, because how are you going to control your entire camp and you let this one person basically leave without any type of repercussions? He had to take some kind of action.
You have to believe me.
Michelle Evans stated prior to leaving over there, Gerald Cruz made everybody their assignments, which window they're going to come through and which door. So she drove the car, and they drove to Elm Street. She stated she parked her car over by the railroad tracks, and she pointed to where, when we found the murder weapons, that's where she parked the car. Michelle went into the home before the murders occurred because her sister lived there, so they wouldn't think anything about Michelle just walking into the house.
They were in that house, and Mr. Raper was extending hospitality. Donna Alvarez was in bed.
That's when Michelle went in another bedroom and opened up the window.
That's what the killers were looking for.
Michelle said somebody flipped the breakers off at the house, which cut out the electricity to the house.
That's when they went in there like gangbusters, coming in the windows, in the doors, and they caught everybody off guard. Those poor people must have been so freaked out when those guys came in wearing masks and everything, because they went right over and started attacking them.
Michelle said she was walked outside, and she walked by a body right there in the front yard and waited in the car until everything was over. Michelle Evans provided me all the names of everybody was there. With that information, we put out a BOL, which is be on the lookout, for all the names that we listed, and they're all wanted for quadruple homicide. Dave Beck is already in custody. The first individual that was picked up was Ricky Vieira.
And then Gerald Cruz, who's the ringleader.
Ron Willie was also arrested.
Everyone except Jason LaMarche. They couldn't find him. He's the final one they want, and they want him bad.
LaMarche had borrowed a car and drove with a female to Oregon, and she did not know what for.
And on the way up, he told her, I was involved in the murders, the massacre on Elm Street. And she freaked out, but she was cool about it. So when they got to Oregon, a little town called Pendleton, they pulled in, got a motel. She's still freaked out, thinking, I'm here with this killer. So she finds the telephone.
Pendleton Police Department activated the SWAT team and took him down at the hotel where he was staying.
Breaking news today out of Pendleton. Police have just made an arrest at a local motel.
They arrested him without incident. Detectives now have all the suspects in custody. When they got into court, the suspects, all 5 of them, were giddy almost. They're joking around that they apparently didn't realize the severity of what they'd done. And it just angered the families of the victims.
It was really, really hard for me for a long time to hear the details of the crime.
They had no remorse at all. I know that for a fact.
Everything was a joke. Apparently, they thought they were going to beat the rap and everybody was going to get off and eventually go home.
Jason LaMarche and Ron Willie were convicted of 4 counts of second-degree murder and were both sentenced to 62 years in prison. For Ricky Vieira, he is on death row right now in San Quentin, along with Dave Beck and Gerald Cruz.
When you take 4 people's lives so violently like that, I don't know what justice would be for a crime like that, to be honest with you. I actually told them, I want to be able to forgive you, but I can never forget what you did to my dad. After my dad was killed, I had this dream, and it was my grandma, his mom, and all she was saying was, "It's about time you got here, Franklin. I've been waiting for you." And so it gave me a lot of comfort to have that dream, because that dream came to me and I knew Dad's okay. He's at peace.
In Cincinnati, we have Riverfest, and it's the biggest event of the year.
They have music, they have fireworks.
When you're on a night crew, you sit around waiting for death.
They were wasting their time looking at me.
Word was spreading among people. Could they be next?
I was afraid to leave my house.
We started off the day at a big party, and we ended up investigating a murder.